Hi everyone, my name is Herkeph and welcome back to our incredibly stupid hardcore world where I'm only allowed to use wooden tools and leather armor. In our last few episodes, we've been focused on the expansion of our mega base for absolutely no reason, as it already had more than enough space for our future escapades even before attending to this project. And in order to progress in this previously mentioned unnecessary project, we've had to spend an absolutely soul-crushing amount of time AFK, as well as placing an ungodly amount of blocks. So in today's episode, I've decided to take a bit of a break from that project in hopes of weakening my desire to partake in the ever so more enticing act of jumping off a bridge. As some of you might remember, we ended our last episode by going to the nether to get our hands on netherite, and since we're only allowed to use wooden tools and leather armor, we can't actually go mining for it, as that would require a diamond pickaxe. So this might make you wonder how I'm intending to overcome this very unnecessary and very much self-imposed obstacle. And my strategy to tackle it was to impose an involuntary reallocation of resources from piglins to our pockets, using a healthy amount of violence. Or expressed a bit differently, my intention was to steal it from bastions. It is at times like these I like to think back of the quote by Martin Luther King Jr. saying that violence is never the answer, which is something I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with. Violence is indeed never the answer, it is a question, to which the answer is yes. So with that, I commenced with our next series of violent crimes in hopes of getting my hands on the aforementioned material that will serve us absolutely no purpose whatsoever. This actually went rather smoothly, which was a big surprise, but definitely a very welcome one, or at least it did, until all hell broke loose and everything went wrong, as I somehow managed to get outsmarted by a virtual pig in a video game made for literal children. But in an incredibly unexpected turn of events, I actually managed to narrowly escape what I thought was my imminent, underwhelming and most certainly avoidable doom. This served as the indisputable evidence that my actions don't have consequences, which was very epic, so I decided to take that into consideration and got back to my criminal activities with the exact same strategy as before. And after having spent enough time for Leonardo DiCaprio to go through 3 girlfriends, we had finally managed to get our hands on enough netherite to accomplish my incredibly elaborate and important master plan. That of course being to make a full set of netherite armor as well as a netherite hoe, which we aren't allowed to use, to in turn get 2 advancements. But before going home to craft our precious and life-changing netherite ingots, I made a quick stop at our raid farm, as I had spent several hours flying around in the nether like some sort of an absolute knob, and by doing so, I had inflicted a decent amount of damage to the durability of our wings, pickaxes, as well as my will to live. But instead of tending to my crippling mental health issues by speaking to my doctor or therapist, I decided to tend to the more important things. And when I had resolved our aforementioned important issues, I made my way back to our base and rummaged around my absolute mess of a storage system to find the random diamond junk that I had accumulated. I have absolutely no idea why I hadn't thrown those away, but I guess that's the way the mop flops. But after having successfully located its whereabouts and picked out some diamond pieces along with a hoe, I got to converting them to their netherite counterparts. It then hit me that it would be pretty neat to display my completely unusable set of armor, which I had for some reason risked my life to acquire, on an armor stand. So I put them on display in my bedroom, but they looked rather plain and not very impressive, so I decided to apply armor trims to it using diamonds, as we have absolutely no use for them, apart from crafting jukeboxes. And with that, we had successfully reached our goal, which almost cost me my entire hardcore world, which was very epic. Though, as we've almost died in a rather gruesome, graphic, and somehow mildly arousing way, I thought that it might be a good idea to get back to our base expansion, as I thought that it might be a good idea to not perish. As some of you may have noticed, the circular platforms we built in our last episode are completely unused. And some of you might be surprised that this is most certainly not a design feature, but rather a part of the expansion where we'll be doing something quite different from our other projects. My plan is to build completely custom villages for biomes that currently don't have villages in them. So with this part of the project, we will, once again, rely on the same strategy which I am the most familiar, that of course being to improvise by coming up with vague ideas throughout the process and hope for the best. But now you might be thinking to yourself, why are you building some villages? Will they actually have a purpose? Or will they be just like the rest of the expansion, which serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever? And the answer to that is rather simple. As you may have noticed in my previous videos, I have previously partaken in the hallmarks that make this game great. The things that make this game so inspiring and irreplaceable to millions across the globe. The things that make this game a core memory that many of us will probably never forget, but rather will cherish even when we've gotten old and wrinkly. The things that make this game feel like home, and some of those, of course, being oppression as well as industrial level slavery operations. So TLDR, I need civilizations which I can oppress from the comfort of our home, and the first village that I will build up and oppress is going to be based on one of the newer, and, in my opinion, one of the coolest biomes that I wish had their own type of village. That biome being mangrove swamps. So I ventured to a nearby mangrove swamp, which rather conveniently was within spitting distance from our base. That is, if you can spit several hundred meters, which on second thought might be a bit far-fetched. Once I had rather epically ventured to the aforementioned swamp, I started grabbing some of that deliciously extravagant wood, as well as some of those weird saplings that aren't called saplings for some reason. And since my plan is to build a village on top of the circular platforms, I realized that I also needed to place it on a floor, as the village would otherwise float in the air. That said floor is supposed to look like a naturally generated mangrove swamp, meaning that we also had to grab a bunch of mud. But now, you might be wondering why I decided to collect the mud from an actual mangrove swamp, instead of making a farm for it. And when I had collected what I thought would be more than enough to achieve our desired result, I got to placing it. So here is a time lapse. However, after having finished about 10% of the floor, we had completely run out of mud, meaning that I had underestimated the scale of this task, so much so that it may be interpreted as a rather mundane and unfunny joke, just like my real life. However, in my defense, I possess about the same level of intelligence and mathematical knowledge as a kindergartner with special needs. This means that I may very well have finished more than just 10%. Though it also means that we could have finished less, but we don't talk about that. But putting my lackluster level of intellect and knowledge aside, I got back to disassembling the mangrove swamp. From there, I continued progress on the floor. And this time, we actually managed to get a decently large portion of the floor done, which was very epic. However, we still had a small patch that was still a work in progress, because of course we did. But after having rinsed and repeated once more, we had finally placed all of the mud for our floor, though when you traverse in a mangrove swamp, you may notice that a lot of the ground is covered in water, and since we wanted to replicate it, I decided to add a bunch of pools of water that would most certainly be considered as less than hygienic, and most definitely not drinkable. This was absolutely perfect, as the goal of these villages is to make its inhabitants as miserable as possible, and not having access to clean drinking water is a very good start. Once that had been attended to, I started marking out the placement for all of the buildings for the village, in hopes that it would act as a decent outline to fill in with more ease than otherwise. But if you know me and my content, that will most likely not happen, as I tend to come up with rather creative and intricate ways of messing things up. And once that had been tended to as well, I got on to collecting various materials which we will use to build this aforementioned village. But that is about all the time we have for this episode. So there we have it, the 20th episode of our incredibly stupid hardcore world. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one.